In new municipalism, I have noticed that women create the bigger parts because they started in the past. In the past, it wasn't business for men, and now, so in a very natural way, became an important part of those processes. And it influenced everyday practice, because if we organize, for instance, a forum of inhabitants, female and male, so we usually organize, for instance, a room for children. We try to think in different way about local politics as far as social needs are concerned. Because they had and have now long experience in dealing with social issues. So I think that it's a little bit different approach, and I hope that it will influence also theory, and we're working on it.
Just a minute, Paul. I have just one comment, even though Paul will be speaking about this. Thank you so much. It was most interesting and revelatory, and the answer to the questions also was very meaningful. You probably know that in India we have this reservation for women in local self-government, and we have more than 1.5 million women in what can be called politics. While the feminists have been doubtful whether it's hierarchical of caste and class, we are finding that 40% of the elected women are Dalits. Dalit meaning those who are excluded. So it's working extremely well in that we interviewed women, I've done studies on it, and you would think that they would be crushed, shrinking lilies. Not at all. They all felt that for the first time they could confront men. We have lovely stories of a woman saying, I used to go and sit on the floor, now I sit on the chair. Lots of examples of self-strength. Why I'm wondering is, the question to you is, the United Nations passed a resolution that 30% quota should be given to women in local government. Is that not happening in Poland?
No. And I think that, through local politics, it's still very rooted on the party system. And so now it's our goal to change it.
Even because Yemen has the 33% now.
But so I think, for instance, in Poland, it isn't solution. Because we receive women only connected with parties and with their vision, political vision. And we have huge problem, because as far as presence of women now in Poland in the national and local level, so we have a lot of women. But their ties with parties, with their politics is so strong that they don't influence or they don't change politics at all. Or even they change politics in bad direction.
Thank you. I have to stop because Paul will be speaking about this quota system, I think.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm picking up the thread, which is also came yesterday, to talk a little bit about quotas, which are important because empowerment, one of the measures of empowerment, as we discovered with Anthony Heath's paper, is in terms of the number of seats held by women in Parliament. And I think some of the measures actually don't include local government enough. I mean, it's usually focusing on Parliament, which is obviously one weakness. But before I start, I want to just endorse what, Anthony and I talk about these things, endorse what he said, which is that merely having more women in Parliament is not, of course, necessarily the end of the story. I mean, what matters is the policies that come out, who still has the power, are doors being opened at different levels in different ways, and is the battle against inequality really being taken forward? And those are more difficult things to measure, and I haven't been able to obviously do that. This is just a kind of a snapshot issue. And more generally, politics itself is very unequal. I mean, we know that in the developed world, the amount of money that people pay in taxes has fallen in the last 20-25 years, and some of the papers have shown this, from 66 to 42%. In other words, the rich have got enormously richer, and when they become rich, they buy politicians, they influence the agendas, they lobby, they bully, they do all kinds of things. So the general, just bear in mind that the background is shifting perhaps the other way. So first of all, let's establish if there is a problem. There are a lot of charts like this. I'm not going to stop on all the slides, but there are a lot of charts which show you the huge kind of variation in the picture. And you can see that there's so many countries still with less than 15%, and 30% is still kind of unsatisfactory, given that our target is probably around 50-50. And I think this is actually, I'm going to skip that one, this is actually a clearer graphic which shows that only 2 countries have got more than 50%. One of them is Rwanda, and I'll come back to that. And the other, and they've got 49 out of 80, 61%, and the other is Bolivia, which is 53%. And even in Europe, the variations are significant. So you've got the Nordic countries obviously very high, 45% in Sweden, and then down to Greece is 20%, and America, which is just useful to always have a look at, is just, bizarrely, it's just 18%. That's a more kind of detailed graphic, but this is probably easier to take into account. So you can see that if on the first bar, we've got 50-50, you can see how there's still a lot of work to do. And you can see by regions, and it's a little bit quite helpful. I mean, the Nordic areas are high, and the Pacific is low. And I think the problem becomes more apparent when you look at leadership, because as we've hinted, in all the different kinds of work that's been done, whether it's municipalities or courts or all the different kinds of professions, obviously the figures get a little bit more negative. And so that's a key area. So even if we're going to talk about quotas, even if we can get the numbers up inside Parliament, there's still the job to do in terms of leadership. So one of the key tools is obviously quotas. But maybe we should just pause and think about the criticisms of quotas, because obviously there is a kind of negative narrative. Some men are always going to be against quotas, okay? So we can just push them aside, and they're kind of always there. There is another argument to say, look, voters should be able to choose who they want. So in a sense, some people argue that it's kind of undemocratic to have quotas. Some people would say that it undermines the legitimacy. If a woman is elected through a quota or a reserved seat, that somehow it undermines her own perception of legitimacy. So you've got women themselves who don't want to be elected in that way, which is understandable, but you've also got the sense of the democratic legitimacy. So those are kind of arguments against which have to be taken into account. But the picture is encouraging. So 39% of countries have now got quota systems. So in a sense, I'm going to suggest that the argument in favour of quotas is one. What I'm going to try and talk about is how they actually work in practice, and whether there's actually more that needs to be done alongside quotas. So this is, I think, the most significant slide I'm going to show you. There are 3 types of quotas. One is reserved seats, which kind of came onto the scene in about the 1930s. And we talked about it in terms of the Panchayati Raj example in India. Secondly, there's party quotas, which are more common in the developed world. And I'll talk about, for example, the Labour Party quotas in Britain. And then there are legislative quotas, which came on in the 80s and 90s. Obviously, party quotas create all kinds of internal conflicts. And the Rwanda example is going to be quite interesting about that. Reserve seats are more clear-cut, but then you have that problem about the perception of legitimacy, both in the general democratic sense and perhaps individuals. But I think this slide shows that, in a sense, that the notion of quotas, the fact that 20 years ago people say, well, quotas, we're not sure about it and so on. I think that battle has been lost. In other words, quotas are accepted as a successful way of changing the picture. If we look at this one, you can see the change in the last 20-25 years. Very significant. We could talk, we've got Nick here, we could talk about the argument. There was this famous Bakke case, do you remember, in California, when the student challenged the whole notion of affirmative action. And there were two judges who, I think Brennan was one of them, who argued very strongly and gave a wonderful defense of quotas, that strict liberal law which requires one rule for